Hey guys, and welcome to the Lunge Lift podcast. Today we're going a bit professional and we're going to start with the sponsor of the show. So the sponsor today is WIT Fitness. As always, we have our code of LL15. That'll get you 15% off their full range on their website. So if you go to wit-fitness.com, browse, buy something, and then maybe tag us in an Insta story showing us what you got. That'd be really good. So, but today, how are you, Ash?
I'm well, thanks, mate.
Good. Back
Happy to
into
be
the
back in the
gym.
gym.
Yeah,
Yeah,
feeling good. Good to be with everyone.
looking good. Yeah, it's nice to see familiar faces, have the little catch ups, and it's weird to train with people around for the first time in a few months.
Top
But
on
yeah,
now.
yeah, top on. Sadly, hopefully it'll be warm enough to justify taking that off soon. But yeah, it's great to see everyone have a full range of equipment. Yeah, I think my legs haven't had any weight applied to them for a long time, so doing a few of those, some accessory
Yeah,
exercises was nice. How
nice.
about you? Are you planning to come back in?
Yeah, plan is to start my gym adventure back next week. So I get myself back into the city. Cannot wait. It's. I think I can. Everyone that I've spoken to has been on the same thing. This week's training has been a bit all over the place because of the excitement and stuff like that. But I think a lot of people, it's a good thing. So I'm not just
Mm.
overloaded and gone, oh, I'm going to do everything again. Like the general advice across the board is always maybe just take your time, ease yourself into it. And I think because no one's seen each other, it's been a really nice way to kind of do exactly that. So
Yeah.
and not get a little too carried away. But yeah, really looking forward to it. And I think what, as you say, is having the option for plenty of things to do and not having
Mm.
access to so much kit and so forth. So, yeah, really looking forward to that. And so today, obviously, we're discussing accessories. So
Hmm.
it'd be a really interesting one because we've obviously just called this accessories, so all about accessories, but across the board within CrossFit, it's basically known as, say, functional bodybuilding, right? So thanks to Marcus Philly and Ryan Fisher and stuff, is it's functional bodybuilding because it has to be functional because you're a CrossFitter. However,
Mm.
when you take it back before CrossFit and say training, so
Yeah.
weightlifters, bodybuilding, it was your accessory lifts. So
Hmm.
I think we'd be really good to maybe define what are accessories
Yeah.
and understand that whatever terminology is used, it's all the same thing, and understand then maybe what the point is for them and kind of maybe how to choose accessories. So let's start. What are accessories and what do you class them
Yeah.
as?
Yeah, I think it's a matter of opinion, exactly what would be classified as an accessory from the coach, and also for what the goal of the athlete, or yeah, what you want out of your training, as to what you'd classify as an accessory. For me, I think if you boil it down, all training is basically an abstraction from your goal, sport, or function. So let me make a bit more sense. Like if you're a powerlifter and you want to get your back squat up, anything that is not a back squat in competition for a single is training, which is not that. So it's abstract. So even doing heavy singles in the gym is still not actually what your function is. And an accessory is just an extension of that principle, and that you're just taking probably a step further away from that function, but still with the goal of improving it. So if we stick with that example, you've got a back squatting competition as the pinnacle of your function. That's what your purpose is training wise. And doing back squats in training would be your main lift, which is exactly the same movement, but in different circumstances, maybe more reps, more volume. And then anything that's not that exercise would be an accessory. So it could be a box squat, which is very similar to partial range. It could be a split squat or a Bulgarian split squat. So it's a single leg variation. Could be a front squat. Basically anything that is not the main lift, but is still serving the purpose of improving the main lift or movement. And I think something we want to talk about today is, it doesn't just mean an exercise. It can be like like a gym-based exercise. I want to apply the same principles to stuff like running. Like if it's
Yeah.
not the key type of running that you're focused on, I would also classify it as an accessory, as it's a step away from the main thing you're working on, but still to improve the main thing you're working on.
I guess it's really defining as well the training versus competing. Like we've done an episode before that as well, like understanding when you compete, what is it you do? And that is your main thing. That's it. So using this example, the back squat, cool, you do the heavy single. So maybe doing sets of 10 is an accessory as well, because you're building up leg volume, so like a leg press, but you're using the actual movement to build up volume. But then would some class it as an accessory? This is, I guess, where you come down to the point you said at the start, is it's an opinion, and it's maybe the coach's thought, like philosophy on that particular movement. And what kind of got me really, like, when I started thinking about this was because this stems from, like, basically main training, right? So this comes from your weightlifters, your bodybuilders and stuff like that. And then when you apply it to bodybuilding in particular, you say, what is it they're trying to get from these accessory lifts? So they're trying to obviously get maximal muscle stimulation and growth. So they have to isolate it to the point where they say, right, this is exactly what I need to do. So when you look at, say, like Miss Olympia, so these are like the best of the best within the bodybuilding world. Yes, they might be enhancing whatever, but they've put so much work into making their outer chest sweep, just right, because they know when they're on stage, if their chest is slightly imbalanced, that's going to be a mark down. So they're like they have grafted with accessories to make the exact one to try and get the best muscle recruitment needed. So then when you take that into the functional world and stuff like that, it's in, like, you just saying you're doing a dumbbell chest press is like, yeah, that's an accessory, but what's it accessory for? Okay, it's an accessory for a bench press. And then you ask, is it really an accessory for a bench press? Because a bench press is with a barbell, it's a fixed object, and you're pushing. So I'd say more a close grip bench press or something like that is an accessory. But then a dumbbell one is great for building chest mass and range of motion. There's so many benefits to this. So this does boil down to your philosophy and your coaches or whoever's idea behind it, and make sure it's an educated one, so you understand why you think what you think. So I found this, when you said about doing this topic, I got kind of excited, because it's like this, because I come from like the powerlifting, bodybuilding side of things, like I've tried all these exercises thinking that this is going to be working for my outer sweep of my chest, and which I never built up, unfortunately. I didn't do enough of them. But it's like, these are the things, and it's such a fascinating topic because it is so opinionated.
Yeah, very much so. I think I hadn't thought about that bodybuilder application, and you're spot on that it's almost that, like, finer sculpting is what bodybuilders would use their accessories for, because they have the big compounds which should build the main muscles all over, hopefully in proportion, but that never is the reality for bodybuilders, that, like, their legs aren't in the proportions that do well on stage just from doing squats and deadlifts. There's always one muscle group for an individual that needs to be brought up to look as good as the others, and they use, like, that's essentially what machines are for in the gym. Like, the fixed machines are to isolate those muscles to bring them up more than their nearest neighbors. So, like, the outer sweep of the pec. So it's just hilarious when you think about that level of sculpting that they have to craft such specific exercises to not even focus on one muscle. It's one part of one muscle. Like, you can get the focus to be at the distal end or the proximal end, like near or far end of a muscle, to try and bring it up.
So it's like, this is then where I think, especially when you get within the functional sphere, where obviously when you think back to CrossFit back in the day, it was just your big movements. There wasn't really the accessories. There wasn't saying, right, okay, we now need to do this. And then as people started to realize things needed to be improved, especially, like, say, with weightlifting and gymnastics, and they started to look into the specialities, and you say, okay, right, this is how to improve my pull-up. This is how to improve my snatch. So then they start seeing all these accessories. So then the accessories started to build in. But again, they're still just using a lot of these barbells. And so they're using the same object, which is good because it's as close to their movement as possible. But then once the introduction of dumbbells got into CrossFit, and then started to people, like, as I said at the start, the functional bodybuilding stuff, it got a bit blurred, because it's like, now you need to ask yourself, are you doing this to improve your main lift, or are you now doing this to look good?
Exactly.
And there's this very blurred line now, and there's nothing wrong with wanting to look good, and dumbbells will improve, and kettlebells will improve your, say, barbell lift to some degree, but you have to understand what you're doing the accessory for and how it's applying it. So yeah, I guess this kind of leads us into the next point, which is what's the point of accessory exercises?
Yeah, great question. I think
You wrote
for me. Sorry,
you wrote the question, so yeah.
Yeah, I did write the question. Yeah. So for me, the point of an accessory exercise is to work on the weakest link holding back your main exercise. And the thing that you've just made me think of there is to get super clear on the function and the purpose of your training overall, because that blurry line in functional bodybuilding, when people do accessories in functional bodybuilding, it's bodybuilding. So they're basically saying that their accessories are to improve their aesthetics rather than their performance. And as long as you're clear and that's why you're doing those exercises in those ways, then that's fine. But if your goal is performance, then your accessory should be focused on improving your performance, whether it's adding kilos to the bar in the main lift or adding reps to your pull-ups. And if you're doing bicep curls to improve your reps on pull-ups, you've got to be honest that that's because you want bigger arms, and it's not because you want to improve your pull-ups. There are much better accessories for improving your pull-ups than bicep curls if your focus is performance. I won't have any CrossFit athletes doing bicep curls who care about performance. If they've got an aesthetic sub-focus, then yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
But be clear on what that function is. We always say it's probably one of the catchphrases of the podcast is like, what is your actual goal? What's your function? And once you get clear on that, then you identify what's holding back your performance in that way, whether it's pure performance or it's your aesthetic improvement. And then you can identify what that limiter is and add some accessory exercises to improve it.
I want a question to you then on that then. So, because I love the fact you brought in bicep curls, because obviously I do love a bicep curl myself. Yeah. Now, yes, they have obviously an aesthetic goal. Like that is a lot of it. However, would you not say a stronger bicep will be able to essentially have a more endurance when you're doing pull-ups for when your back starts to fatigue and your biceps need to kick in and you're on like the last rep or two and stuff like that? Yeah. A stronger bicep will help you get there. So yes, a bicep curl isn't necessarily maybe the best accessory to improve your pull-ups, but it's one that is a valid accessory as long as you've got the time to do it, because obviously then you need to evaluate how much time have I got in training. So accessories need to be in the list of priorities. Yes, bicep curls might be towards the end of the priority list, but they still have a valid place to, you know, like, because especially when it comes to like dumbbells as well, where, you know, you have to singly contract that muscle.
Yeah, all else being equal, stronger bicep will improve your pull-up. Yeah. But the assumption there is that your bicep is the limiter that's stopping you doing more pull-ups. And there's so many other things that could be involved. So having an accessory exercise which is closer to a pull-up is more likely to have more carryover to pull-ups than just working the biceps. And say you look at somebody do some pull-ups and they can sort of pull their back, they can get the shoulders going, but they're just not getting that elbow flexion. And that might be an indicator that it is just bicep strength that is limiting their pull-up. But there are many people where that's true. Yeah. And like I say, if you've got that sub-focus on aesthetics, then they're have at it. Like bicep curls are great. But something like a ring row or foot-supported pull-ups or banded pull-ups, then you've got so much more carryover because you've got
the actual movement.
Exactly. It's the same movement pattern. You've got your muscles from your arms, your shoulders, your back, your lats, all working and sequencing together. And you've got your core control if you're hanging from a bar as well. So it's so much more similar that the carryover to the performance will be much greater. You won't overload the bicep as much as you would in a bicep curl because it's so isolated. That the workload is spread amongst all those other muscle groups, which is why it helps the performance more, but you don't get so much hypertrophy in the bicep. So depending on what the priority is, one might be better than the other for the specific goal. But I think,
I guess though, if we're then obviously, because again, talking about performance, so we're talking then about an overhand pull-up, whereas if you then do a supinated, say chin-up variation, where there's a lot more bicep recruitment, maybe then there'd be a stronger case for bicep curls. Because
if you want to do bicep curls, you can do bicep curls.
No, they won't be. That's from all the triathlon training I'm doing, I'm still doing my bicep curls. But this is the thing. It's like I find it so interesting because it's like there's such essentially it's an easy thing to sell online as functional bodybuilding, and this is why where I love this episode, because it's like, there's nothing wrong with functional bodybuilding, but the fact that it's got the word bodybuilding in it needs to be kind of the main takeaway. Just because it's got the word functional before it is just a glossy, make it look pretty, like, oh, you can do this now because you're doing it for a function. It's like, but this is it's basically trying to justify it when there's no need to justify it in the first place. It's like, you can do bodybuilding. There's nothing wrong with bodybuilding, and it's like, you will look better. So when you take your top off in competition or wherever, you will look better. And that's essentially what most people, when they are training, are trying to train towards, to look better, but take away the exact performance I want to then be the best. So we're talking about the general public, most time are going to be a better human, which normally in turn creates a better looking physique, a stronger physique, and a better functioning physique. So like, that's why CrossFit done as well as it done, because it started to encompass a lot of that. And I just think when it comes to accessories, we're getting so far away. I see so many different ones on Insta when it was on there. Like, there's so much away from the movements now. Like, when we talk about the start of the back squat, you're now seeing these ridiculously just overcomplicated movements. You're like, right, is this necessary? Like, is this really getting you stronger at the back squat? It's like when you've got some like hard, like trained athletes that know that single leg variations and the barbell variations, like, just keep with the basics and they will get you strong, and then maybe like do slight variations here and there. But I think we need to kind of come back a little bit to, as you said, why is it we're doing what we're doing, and how far away am I going from the back squat? Like, am I doing this stupid hovering on a Bosu type back squat? It's fine. So, but it's just, it kind of like, as you might be able to tell, it kind of riles me up, some of this stuff, because it's like, it's just this facade. Yeah.
And it's almost like the more abstract it gets, the better it is. Or I saw some guy put up like a trap bar hang muscle snatch as a way of improving your jump. And it's just like, just jump. Like, there's so many different variations of just a jump that will improve your jump.
Yeah.
Why are you doing a trap bar hang muscle snatch?
So that's what's quite good, because I guess why is he doing that? So it then comes down to being able to select your own accessory exercises. So, and understand why you're doing them. So how would you recommend selecting your own accessories, so for our listeners to maybe think about what is it that they need to do so they can start to understand where they can improve and how they can improve?
Yeah, spot on. I think so. Number one is getting clear on what matters and what you're actually training for. So that if you've not said that enough already this episode, get clear on your function so you know what matters and you're tracking what matters. And the next step is then identifying what's holding back the improvement in that area. So if it's back squat, is your back squat continuing to improve? So what cornerstone session do you have to keep measuring your progress? It could be a 5x10, it could be a 5x5, could be like a heavy single, but is that tracking upwards so you feel like you are making progress in that area? And if not, why not? So there's a bit of a diagnosis piece here. Like, if I've not been able to add any weight to my lift for a really long period of time, what's happening? Is my technique off? Am I not able to get into the right positions? Is the bar path away from optimal? Am I only using one leg? Have I got a big hip shift to one side? Like, am I unstable? Like, is there a lot of wobbling happening, which means I'm wasting energy? These are the sort of questions you need to ask yourself to figure out what would allow you to get to the next level of lifting. And I think in other sports like weightlifting, you've got to look at your form and your technique, which area of the lift is struggling. So you could be pulling the bar really, really high, but you're just not catching it, or you're losing the lift because the bar path is off. And this is where this is one thing that I think separates really great experienced coaches from new coaches, is that they'll have this arsenal of accessory exercises quick to hand to say, I can see what's going wrong, and now I'm going to chunk that part of the skill on its own and work on it in isolation. So say, let's use that example of pulling the bar really high. You don't need to do any extra pulls. So you don't need clean pulls or snatch pulls to get the bar even higher, because that's not the problem. The problem is getting under the bar and catching it successfully. So you could use tool variations where you're just snapping under the bar to practice getting down quickly, or snatch balance to practice that control moving into the bottom of the overhead squat if it is a snatch. And yeah, experienced coaches generally just have more confidence in prescribing that specific lift and then reintegrating it into the main skill. So that would be complexes in weightlifting. Like, that is why complexes exist, is that you're choosing the area or component of the lift that you're struggling with and then reintegrating it into the main skill. So if you're using a tool clean, you might go to then a hang clean and then pulling from the floor to groove that movement pattern and have it transfer over, because you might be great at doing tool cleans on their own, but actually when you start doing a fuller version of the lift, you lose that technique and the bar paths all over the place, or you lose the speed under the bar. So like any other skill, imagine you're learning to play a piece of music. You'll practice the hard few bars of that piece of music over and over and over until you get it before you try doing the whole piece. Otherwise you just waste loads of time doing the easy bit when actually the only bit you need to practice is the bit that you mess up.
Yeah, I really like that. And especially with, like, I think weightlifting is such a nice like area for accessories, because there are so many accessories, because it's such a technical lift, and there's only, I'd say 3 of them, 2 of them, clean and jerk. So there's a sense you can break it down into the 2 there, and then the snatch. So because there's a small amount of exercises and there's so many accessories to go with that to improve it, I love weightlifting because it knows what the main thing is. So it wants, and when we had Chloe on, it was great. And it's like, she don't care about her deadlift numbers. Yeah. She cares about her back squat numbers, because again, it's that leg strength and a front squat. So it's the exact sports. Whereas yes, a deadlift is great for strengthening posterior chain and stuff like that, but she don't give a monkeys about it. It'll be her clean pulls, her snatch pulls, stuff like that. So weightlifters know what their main thing is, and that is it. This is where it gets blurred, especially within CrossFit, because it's like we have so many main things. We have to understand what we want to focus on, and that's why people go through weightlifting blocks, gymnastic blocks and stuff like that, because they understand they need to focus on a certain area so they can get better. Because if you're trying to do all the accessories for your poor snatch, say, try and do all the accessories for some pull-ups, try and do some cardio as well in there because your engine shit, it's like that's your sessions. You're a pro athlete now, you're spending all day training, and there's nothing wrong with that, and if you've got the time to do it, then great. But for most, the ones that can say maybe train an hour to the class, or maybe an hour, 2 hours if you're not, you still are limited. So you have to see, okay, cool, what accessories are going to give me the most bang for my buck? And then they're the ones I'm going to focus on. And when they stop working or they don't work at all, because you might try it and actually think, do you know what, this wasn't the accessory for me. This hasn't given me the gains, which is going back to the point where you mentioned about tracking. You need to say, right, my back squat hasn't gone up and I've just done a load of front squats. So I used front squats as my accessory and it just didn't get my back squat up. Then fair enough, maybe it wasn't your quad strength or your midline that was breaking you down. Maybe it was more your glutes and your posterior chain that was lacking with your back squat and you just didn't realize it. So I think weightlifting, I think, is a really good example of that. And, and complexes, as you said, I think they're great as well, because it's so easy to get really good at, say, a tool clean, as you said, and then you try and do it and you forget. You've still got to get it from the floor, so you still need to understand how to keep the bar close. There's so many other parts, and so keeping that complex keeps the intensity up, and they're amazing. So, I guess, what about if you go into things like running? So because
Yes.
when you go into cardio exercises, as you mentioned at the start of the podcast, you know, there is ways to accessorize for this because it's not as simple as just run.
Yeah, spot on. Yeah, I love this topic. I think if you are a competitive runner and say you've got a specific distance in mind, anytime you're not running that distance, it's that step away, that abstraction from your sport, from your function. And it's simple, but so obvious that running faster or slower than your race speed is a different skill, and it is a accessory of sorts, or an accessory of sorts, sorry. And I think that's probably the simplest way to break down run training, is that you're either going over the speed that you want to race at or under the speed to then run further. And you see this quite commonly where people who run at the same speed all the time, they just can't change gears. So you might have somebody who has a 5K time, which is only very slightly faster than their 10K time. So whether it's 5 or 10, they're at the same speed, which for most people seems really unusual, because you should be able to run faster on a shorter distance, but they just don't have a gear above. And this type of athlete could typically just run and run and run at the same speed for an almost, like unlimited distance, because they're so efficient at running at that speed. But when the distance becomes shorter, they can't crank it up. So these are the people who like to just go out and run. They'll just get their trainers on, go and run X distance, and it'll feel really good. And, you know, they've got their training for the day. But if they actually want to improve their 5K time, they have to be running faster than they can sustain for 5K, which again, it seems really obvious, but people don't think to change it up in that way. So doing some track work, some interval sessions, or doing like 1 kilometer repeats, which they need to push themselves as hard as they can to run over speed and get used to running above the 5K current speed. And they could look into doing power exercises, so jumping, bounding, all those like run technique drills, which will improve their efficiency and just force generation, which is going to get them going faster forwards. And I think people don't look to the cardio sports as things that might benefit from accessories, but they massively do, because something like running, you're taking so many steps that if you can improve the output of each step, it compounds over the distance and has a huge carryover to performance.
Do you know, it's funny because as you're saying, it's this kind of, in some respects, feels reflected of my own like fitness level, because it's like I can't remember off the top of my head. I was quickly trying to find it, but I couldn't. So like my 10K is roughly, say, just under 50 minutes. I think it's like, or say 50 bang on. My 5K quickest is only about, I think, like 22, 23. So it's not that much like fast, do you know what I mean? So even though when I run, say, 12K and I ran 15K as well, they've all been roughly around, say, 5 minutes per kilometer. Like I can run faster because I've done some intervals, but obviously I've not been doing it long enough for them to actually take part in. Basically, I've not been doing it long enough to actually see the benefit of them yet. But as you were saying that, it's funny because in some respect, I feel cardio people do it, but they just don't call it accessories. It's just different sessions, because it's as you were saying, it's like obviously with cycling. Now I do VO2 max sessions, so where I'm above FTP and then I go below FTP. I do over unders where you're flirting just over and under. I do zone 2s. I do all these. They're just not called accessories. They're called the specific energy system sessions. So but I think why it's important to class it as an accessory is to understand then the need for that, because doing VO2 max sessions. So as this is an example. So was it yesterday's session? No, the day before, Wednesday. So I did Wednesday session, which was some fartlek runs, so intervals basically, into a bike, and it was VO2 max sessions, right? Now, I don't run or bike at either of those two intensities, right? Because I don't sprint and stop, sprint, stop, basically like that. I don't ride at hard, really hard, and then drop down like that. It's basically you trying to find the average and build that up. So we've mentioned in previous podcasts about raising your floor so the ceiling can keep growing as well, because you don't want too big a distance. Now, classing these, like for me, that's all they call like brick sessions, because it's doing one into the other, because it's that's an accessory in itself, is understanding what your body, the stresses that your body needs to go under. So I'm then training the accessory of bike to run or run to bike for this particular thing. But it's just, I guess, in the endurance world, they probably don't say, oh, it's an accessory training, when really it is.
Exactly. It's chunking up the skill, like that transition. So you practice the feeling of bike fatigue going into running. You practice the skill of transitioning, like changing kit, changing shoes. And I thought of it earlier, actually, when you're talking about weightlifting, is the sport is clean and jerk. So anytime you're doing clean on its own or jerk on its own, that's an accessory. You never get to jerk without having done a clean in sport, but you will practice your jerks in isolation to get your jerks better. And it is that principle and concept of abstracting the weak link from your performance and then working it in a little bit of comparative isolation, and how far away from the main thing you go is the judgment call of, do I need to go to bicep curls? Probably not. Like that's very far away from pull-ups. If that's what you're working to improve. So that is
So it's so also this kind of just when you talk about the jerk there, and it's like when you have, say, an imbalance between the two sides, and so you'll do a lot then single limb exercises, whether that's with dumbbells, kettlebells, whatever, or maybe the barbell itself. So just something that I tend to, this is just a philosophy that I've always done with all my clients and everyone I've always recommended, is if you have a weaker side, and you tend to always know what your weaker side is, and if you don't, you'll know about it very quickly. But say, for instance, you're doing a single arm dumbbell press, right? Going overhead, so you're doing a shoulder press. If you know your right side is stronger than your left side, right, and you're doing, say, a superset or whatever, I always recommend first set, start with your stronger side, because you want to ingrain the movement pattern of this is how to do the exercise. And then every set subsequent after that, you start with your weaker side, because then you want the most brain energy and focus, and then the energy in the actual muscle to perform the exercise correctly. So then you use your weaker side throughout all the sets there, because you've already ingrained the correct movement pattern in the first set, and then everyone after that, you know what to expect. So you're doing that. So it's just a way I've always, with my own training, my clients' training, it's worked, because if you always do your weaker side first, just imagine your first set, and it's always a bit funny. That first few reps always a bit wonky and stuff. And then you're telling your good side, this is what it's supposed to be like. And you're like, so for me, it's a way, that is not studied or anything. That's just something that I believe in.
I think there is actually some research on that.
Oh, really?
So I think so. Don't quote me, but
I'm going to now,
I believe there is. I've covered my ass. I think there is a phenomenon, something to do with mirror neurons. So mirror neurons are basically part of your nervous system, which allows you to replicate skills. So when a baby is learning to move, it's able to copy movements from parents and other people. And this is documented in humans and animals. But I believe that there is also some evidence for mirror neurons operating from sides of the body. So if you're able to execute a skill with one arm, you can pick it up faster from the other than learning it from scratch. So that sequencing and motor patterning does carry over from learning from the good side. So, mate, you're ahead of the science there. In your
I like that.
But that's something you just reminded me of, which is quite funny. I remember at school when everyone was doing bicep curls to work on their pull-ups, there was a guy who had some dumbbells, and he basically was doing both arms. I think he was doing alternating curls, and then his weak arm failed. And so he just dropped that one, and he just kept banging out reps on his strong arm. And I was just like, Do you,
Do
do you
you not see
realise
what's happening?
exactly? Yeah, you're exacerbating this imbalance by making the strong side even stronger. And so my approach, similar to yours, there is that you, if you're addressing an imbalance, you get the weak side to go earlier. So whether it's first or not, but yeah, whether it's the first set, then you just match the reps from the weak side, so you don't then get the strong side even stronger. And something I might have said on the previous podcasts is it's not wrong to do extra reps, maybe even double or triple on the weak side to help it catch up to the strong side. Because if you've got a really deeply ingrained imbalance, your body has loads of like a very strong tendency to favor the strong side. So you've got to have a very strong stimulus to get it back on to the weak side. And I think people are shy to do that because it feels so imbalanced in the other way. But if the imbalance is very strong, you've got to have a big intervention to redistribute force and work into the side that has been hiding until that point.
I like it, mate. I like it. So I guess this is kind of like when it comes to selecting your own accessories, as you said, we do need to understand, just to kind of summarize that bit, we need to understand where our main thing is, like what we're trying to improve upon, and try to, like, well, I know we've mentioned this previous podcast as well, but it's like try and stay as close to that as possible to make sure. I think when we used, we spoke about it with cycling, and it's like doing a rear foot elevated split squat, say, or split squat in general. Great for building single limb strength. So yes, it will say carry over to say cycling because you'll have a stronger leg, but your leg is doing multiple revolutions a minute. So how much does it carry over? So that's where you need to make sure your accessories is cycling. And then if you've got some extra time as well, you're doing your strength work, because again, there's going to be other benefits along with just say improving cycling. So it's a really, accessories are individual, but make sure when you are picking them, you're picking them for the right reason, and it could be to look better, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Nothing wrong with that. Spot on. Yeah, I think one other thing I wanted to mention was as a takeaway that accessory exercises can be changed more often than main exercises. Like if you're clear on what your function is and what outcome you're working towards, there should be some mainstays and some staples, whether it's, if you're a powerlifter, you'll always squat, bench and deadlift, but the accessories to work on the weak links around those can change more often. You still obviously need to give them a chance to actually have a impact. However, because they're focused on the weak link, hopefully that weak link is changing as you've addressed it with your accessory exercises. And just be cognizant of the fact that that's okay and you don't need to hang on to them forever. It might be that this portion of the lift was your limiter. Now you've sorted that out, you can move on to the next one that's holding you back. Yeah,
and then I guess as well, like if you then really like a particular accessory exercise and then it's not your limiting factor anymore, you can still do it, but understanding why you're not doing it now to improve that weak part. You're doing it because you enjoy the accessory exercise. And again, enjoyment is part of training. You need, because that's going to keep you showing up day after day. And it just made me think of Westside there, because obviously they keep the movements as close to the movements as possible, using bands, chains, deficits, this, that. And intensity is always really high because they're trying to lift the heaviest one rep, and they very rarely go so far from those lower reps when they're doing those accessories to the main lifts, because they know the neural efficiency needs to be there to understand when it comes to game day that they're used to switching it on, even if it's submaximal. They've still got that. They've got the go button.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, you can get too abstracted from the function. So for a power lifter, doing 50 rep sets is so far away, the intensity is so far away from what you're actually trying to create in your sport, that it like the bicep curl to pull up, it's very far down the continuum in terms of carryover. So I think that's part of the reason Westside have been successful in the past, is that the intensity is always high, even if the variation is a couple of steps away from the main lift, the speed, the power, and the neuromuscular efficiency is still being worked on, and that does have great carryover to a 1 rep max. And it's another component.
Yeah. So for the listeners, because I know we've kind of jumped around a bit today, because again, it's quite a passionate topic, I guess, for in a way both of us. Because obviously with you and your silly lunges, their accessories, me and my bodybuilding, powerlifting backgrounds into CrossFit, is like we're both quite passionate in different ends of the spectrum about this particular topic. So it's been a really interesting one. But if our listeners want to really get something from today and they still feel a little bit unsure about maybe what we've been talking about this past however long, what are maybe some of your go-to generic like improvements to basically take away? Because one thing I just want to add in here is filming yourself is probably one of the most important bits, because otherwise then you are just pissing in the wind essentially and you're hoping to get the right accessory. So from my point, beyond anything like, oh, I'm doing it for Insta and stuff, is filming yourself is number one, especially if you're on your own.
Yeah, big time. Like I think we said it before, feelings are a shitty indicator of truth. So if you're guessing whether you're imbalanced or not because it feels like one leg's doing more than the other, that's not probably going to be an accurate representation of reality. So having a camera on or getting someone's second opinion is really important. To go back to your question of recommendations, I think I'll start by basically laying out the types of areas that can need accessories, and then some general advice on how to program them if you're not sure which one is actually your limiter. So the usual suspects, if you're trying to add in accessory exercises, are your classics of mobility and stability. So from a mobility point of view, are you able to achieve the positions necessary to perform your task well? Could be simple as like ankle range in a squat. If you're lacking that, then it's going to hold back your performance because you can't actually get into biomechanically an optimal position to create force. On the stability point of view, say you're looking at jerks and it's super wobbly, your bar path might be excellent, but you still struggle to control that lockout overhead, and that's really holding back you from adding more kilos to the bar. So working on stability there. We've already talked about imbalances a lot as the next one. These can exist both from a left side to right side, simple sort of limb strength, mobility or stability difference. But you also get imbalances above and below in the kinetic chain. So if you think about your posterior chain in a deadlift, for example, you could have an imbalance between your hamstrings, glutes, and lower back. In like the classic one is the lower back is just doing way more than is optimal to pull a heavy deadlift. So addressing the relative contribution of those muscle groups can be the fastest way to bust through a plateau and obviously reduce pain as well. Something else that's really useful is partials. We kind of touched on it in a bit of a roundabout way, but if you know in a deadlift you struggle to break the floor, then adding in some deficits to overload that bottom portion of the lift is a great tool. And similarly, like the rack pulls, if the lockout is where you struggle, like and West Side are very good at using stuff like that. The other sort of macro area to consider is the different planes of motion. Quite often the body will borrow from one plane or another to achieve its task. So making this a little bit more real, lateral hip stability is a common limiter for people in squatting or running. So what that basically means is there's too much side-to-side motion at the hip, and because they're wasting energy going side to side, they miss out on force production in the direction that matters. So upwards in a squat or forwards when you're running. So if you get more frontal plane stability, you're then able to improve force generation in the plane that matters. And those are probably the main areas that I would look to incorporate accessories through some sort of assessment. However, to make it a bit more general and easy to apply yourself, the generic advice I'd give is generally single limb variations are great because you are able to address a lot of those things as a catch-all approach. So if you're doing a single leg squat, you will be working mobility and stability at the same time.
Single arm bicep curl, you know.
Exactly, yeah. Sort out your pull-ups with bicep curls. And yeah, it does sort of sweep up a lot of those things indirectly. Yeah, it's just a really clear way to address the bigger movement. The second thing, obviously, I'm going to say triplanar variations to pick up those borrowing from other planes, and it is just a nice sort of sweep through to cover off potential imbalances that occur across planes, and you are just going to build a bigger range of competence. And I can't remember, I think it was Steffi Cohen talks about this quite nicely, where she says you've just got more movement options. So if your hip is comfortable going forwards, backwards, sideways, and rotating, you're more likely to find the optimal position when you do a squat of primarily just up and down. Whereas if you never train those different directions, you almost narrow down your movement capacity because you're only ever moving through one set of shapes. So for the general athlete, it's just a nice way to retain very rounded functionality is the best way to think about it.
Go and play some sport, basically.
Yeah, play some sport is definitely a great recommendation. And the last one I'd say for general recommendations would be in cardio, just going above and below. Like, so if you're a runner, running faster than you normally would and slower than you normally would, and the gait cycle does change with speed. Obviously, walking looks different to jogging, looks different to sprinting. So having a bit of skill development slightly away from your normal speed will overload the aspects of your gait at your speed in a way that can improve it beyond just doing that one pace all the time.
Yeah, I think when I mentioned earlier about like filming yourself, when it comes to like these cardio activities, sometimes you can't necessarily do that, but it's when it comes to running, I think you know when you've lost it, when basically your midline has stopped working and you feel your hips. And so any runner will know the feeling of when your hips are shifting side to side, and you know you're just like spaghetti running down the road. And it's the same as like when we're driving along and I look out the window and I see runners, and it's just like you can see they're either new runners or they're just something that they're just weak, and it's just like they need to but what's a really interesting thing is they're not wrong because they probably don't understand they're running efficiently, so they need to be told. Obviously, I'm driving along and I don't want to be that guy. Hey, you got some lateral hip shift there. You might want to sort that. But is in like, if you do, don't be afraid to, if you're finding you're stagnant, that is probably worth the time to talk to someone that then can maybe look at these type of things, because it's such a, I think people's, not confidence, people's ability to talk to someone when they need help. So people don't like asking for help. They want to do it themselves, and I'm prone to that as well and stuff like that. So it's like, but asking for help there's nothing wrong with that. And I think when it comes to accessory training, asking for help is so key because it can really save your time. Because as you said, is you can film yourself and maybe think, right, this is going to be the right accessory for me, and maybe try a few different accessories along the way. They might or might not work. But when they do start to stagnate, ask for help and ask a professional to kind of see what is it that's just not working. I'm doing this, I've done this, and you're probably on the right track, which is great. But maybe you're just missing that. As you said, like, when we said about, like you said about experienced coaches, we have the essentially the toolbox of accessories to understand when and how to use them. But also then we can explain to our clients and stuff why we're using them. And that's always the thing, like with my PT model, and I'm pretty sure you're similar to the point where you'll tell someone to do something, but I'll explain to them why they're doing it as well. Because if they don't understand why, and they're just doing a movement and they leave you, they just think, oh, that was just today's training. It's like, no. You was getting, that's a lateral hip shift. So we were doing these lunges, or we were doing this movement to strengthen that, so you have the ability. And that's, I think, really key, is to when it always links back why you're doing the accessory. And that's the
Yeah.
thing. Make sure you're not just, doing it for shits and giggles.
Great point. Yeah, that's really well said.
Thank you.
But another thing I just picked up on there was the stagnation point, and I think that is another key thing to do with your accessories is still track your accessories, track the performance in your accessories, and correlate them with the performance of the thing that you're working on. So when you do more jumping and power work, do you feel faster when you run? When you do more silly lunges, do your lift numbers go up? If yes, great, you're on the right lines. If no, then something else needs to change. It's not the right accessory that's actually unlocking the next level of performance. But unless you're tracking it, you are just guessing. So that diagnosis piece, I think, is prevalent throughout all of programming and training adjustment, that you have to be on top of whether it's working or not. And only then can you make an informed decision as to whether the accessory is right for you.
Yeah, just to finish this off, I just wanted to have a real world application of basically one of this. And when you gave me my silly lunges to help me, so unfortunately I never correlated how they improved, say, my back squat and whatever, right? Because at the time I was having a lot of lateral hip shift into my right hip and so forth, and I never tested my top end, so I never really understood that, so it was improved. However, what I did notice was I was feeling my glute med a lot more, and I was feeling a lot more stable in the squat. So even though my number metrics may not have gone up at the time because I didn't test them, I felt more stable in the movement, and that is a metric in itself. And that's something where you're writing down, like, think, cool, doing these lunges or doing this helped me feel a lot more stable, which we've touched on over here earlier with the mobility, stability, and the balance stuff. Is like, sometimes it's not about necessarily improving your strength overall. It's about having a better foundation to give you the ability to build better strength.
Yeah.
So you adjust into that.
And your pistols, mate. Don't forget that.
Yeah, no, I know. I was able to pistol, and I fucking did, what a shitload, wasn't it, in that workout?
That's a great metric, yeah. Like from not being able to do pistols easily to banging them out in workouts. So that's a big sign that,
so
a good metric.
Yeah, so Ash, I absolutely loved today, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did, and you got something from it. As always, do leave us a comment if you have any questions, especially on our YouTube channel. So write in the comments or drop us a message on our Insta at lunge.lift. If you did enjoy the episode, do give it a cheeky 5 stars on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to it. Give it a like on YouTube if you are watching. And apart from that, thank you very much for your time. We really do appreciate your listen, and we'll see you next week.
Cheers, guys.